Go.
Well, hello, everyone, especially those at Memorial Drive Church of Christ. We are here again for our post-sermon conversation. Tim had the role. I'm Jason, by the way, and this is
Tim Rush,
and he had the role of preacher yesterday. And so we're just going to process, as we do typically. We just happen to be recording this time. Of kind of how that went and what his motivations were, and just kind of digging a little bit deeper into some of the stuff he brought up. And so, yeah, I want to start the conversation. What we're doing with this is voices. You have a voice that's in your head. And in the past, we processed voices like "I'm not saved enough" or "I'm not worthwhile." But this one was more of "I'm not smart enough." Was the voice that you were speaking to, and then God's answer to that. And so I just want to ask you, what drew you towards that? Of all the voices in our head, what called to you on that one this week?
Yeah, probably most off because I feel so familiar with that voice. That feels like a constant. I feel it nagging. I feel it whispering often, but specifically with so many things going on right now, with our church, dealing with a building that's burned down, and then moving into COVID, social issues going on and on. Yeah, it just feels like there are so many complex questions that it feels like a maze or a riddle that's too big, too many moving parts to handle all at once. So in that setting, I realize that familiar voice is playing out again. Don't even try. This is too big. Just be quiet. Let somebody else step up and lead.
Yeah, I think I certainly connect with that message. And the interesting thing with it is, no matter how smart you are in something, like when you start anything new, that you learn stuff. There's a learning curve, but you learn stuff and you get more proficient and feel more competent. But no matter how much you know, there's one other step always. So that's what gives that voice life in every situation.
Yeah, and maybe some people never hear it in this way, so it doesn't ring the same to them. But I was thinking there are probably some people that are thinking, I know the answer to COVID, or I know the answer to social unrest. But those same people are probably the ones who are going, I don't know what to do with my adult children. I don't know what to do with my boss. And so my guess is that all of us on some level are going, it's too much. It's too big. If I were smarter, I would know how to handle this.
Yeah. And it certainly feels in this time, not that the crisis in the world, that we touch them directly many times, but
Mm-hmm.
you've seen the list of things that have happened in 2020 and how the Australian fires were this big deal. And then now it's hard to remember that because of everything else.
Yeah.
But it almost feels like God is saying, or God is using this to say, do you understand this? Yes, God, I do. Well, how about this?
Yeah.
Now, God, I think I do. Now, how about this?
Yeah.
It just feels like every day we wake up to new things that would push on the boundaries of what we can really take in and figure out how to deal with. Because that's the thing. It's one thing for me to solve COVID, or some scientists to solve COVID. It's the ripple effects that affect all of us, though. It's not so much solving COVID as much as how do I maintain my mental health when COVID is going on? How do I maintain my relationships? How do I keep doing my job? How do I, ... And that's the implication in all of our life. There's some space where I think God wants to point out, do you understand you can't do this on your own? And part of it's intelligence, because the flip side is, if you're intelligent enough, you could do anything, if you were intelligent enough.
Yeah. Well, even thinking about schools reopening, and I love that somebody put on Facebook, let's practice now on how we will respond to people by saying, I know that was a hard decision, instead
Yeah,
of putting our wisdom response on top of it. Um, but
right.
but when people talk about, when child abuse, that the majority of child abuse cases are caught by teachers, and so there is this other level, that's not on my radar,
Right.
that that
Well,
that's a reason why schools should be open. And I'm not saying so schools should be open, but I'm saying, oh man, there are more details and there are more pieces to the puzzle, and after a while it does just start to feel overwhelming.
yeah. Yeah, that I'd never really thought even of those implications. Yeah, and especially if we go a whole year, where it's all distance learning. And I know talking with the people back in March and April, the challenge of distance learning with their kids,
Yeah.
even if they had good technology, even if they had access to computers and every kid had access in their family. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't take us long to get to the end of our own intelligence
Yeah.
in trying to figure out things.
Yeah.
So good.
Well, I was just going to say, yeah, so maybe this is a conversation about preaching in general, but one of the hard things with this, I feel like, is, um, this voice comes up for me, and I think I recognize it in other people because it's a voice that comes up for me. So where's the balance of preaching to myself, uh, and not preaching to me, but preaching because this is what I know. I mean, I know people struggle with this because it's a place that I live, but then not making every sermon about, this is where I live. Thinking outside the box of what are voices people hear that it's not on my radar because it's not my struggle. So there
Right.
is this real piece of, so yeah, how to know, uh, how to approach these things, what messages to give time to. Are we just all the same, just with different tweaks, um, or are there things that I'm just not aware of?
Yeah, I have encountered that in a little bit different way. I've had people come up when I use, you know, when you're making a point spiritually. Let me just use something really basic. Hey, this concept that we're talking about right now will bless you. It will bless you in your marriage. It will bless you with your kids. It'll bless you with, I tend to go to the same things, you know, and every once in a while I will intentionally say, what if you're in a situation, and I get a little bit more specific, and I'll get people come out and say, man, thank you for using that illustration. It's when they don't consider themselves that the marriage or the parenting illustration, even if they're married and they're parents, but if for whatever reason that doesn't resonate with them, an off a little bit different illustration will connect with them, and that just reminds me we are so different. Which then it reminds me, if we're so different and we're expected to communicate to a bunch of people, we have to be reliant on someone bigger than us,
Yeah.
smarter than us, you know and that certainly is where your sermon went. I want to touch on more of that message in a minute. I wanted to ask you, you used an illustration about when you were a 4-year old, and I don't know if there are those who will watch this that haven't seen the sermon yet, but can you kind of set that up for us, like tell
Yeah.
that story again?
Yeah. So it was 4-year old Timmy walking home from kindergarten at noon. So I'm out of school 3 hours before my brother and sister. I walk home and mom's not at home. And so I'm knocking on the door, yelling, and suddenly mom not being home, um, there's there was an inability for me to think rationally about why that would be. It was as if my reality was now mom is not here, and no future tense, just mom is not here. This is now my reality. And so mom gets home, finds me on the back step, weeping, and she looks across the yard, across the neighbor's yard, and says, why didn't you go to your dad's office? which is 200 yards away. Um, didn't think of it. Wasn't a possibility in my little world. Yeah. So then I took on the message. If you were smart enough, you wouldn't be suffering here. And I explained in the sermon, I hope well, that was not mom's message. I'm not attributing that to my mom giving me that message, but it's how our minds work. It's how Satan plants a seed to say, if you were smart. And I honestly, if we had more time, I wanted to illustrate how from 4-year-old to 47-year-old, how many times Satan has had opportunity to emphasize that point. How many times it's just been an obvious, hey, if you were smarter, you wouldn't have done that dumb thing. If you were smarter, X. We didn't have enough time for me to unpack that message unfolding. But yeah, so that was the story.
Yeah, I think that's a really good example, and it's really important distinction to make. This wasn't what your mom or your dad told you. It was a message you took on. It was a voice you took on because of that situation. And what's been really interesting, Heather and I do some work with marriages, and we borrowed this thing called the pain peace cycle. I don't know who developed it. We got it out of Fuller, I think. But basically, you walk people through this dynamic of what is it you feel, and then what is it you do when you're in conflict. And you have this cycle because you have what you feel and what you do, then you have what your spouse feels and what your spouse does, and it creates this cycle. And the pain cycle is where you say, man, I'm feeling really, really defensive about this. I'm feeling very like you think I'm stupid or whatever. And then my reaction is I get mad and I walk away, storm away, or I hit or I yell or whatever, and then that affects, and so on goes the cycle. One of the key things when we were learning that was once you've established what is your normal pattern in your relationship, we were asked the question, when is the first time you felt that way? When is your first memory of feeling this defensiveness or this whatever? And it was kind of twofold. Number one, almost everybody that we've taken this through, they immediately realize, oh, this problem didn't start with my spouse.
Yeah.
Like this message is, she's not telling me I'm not smart enough. This is something I'm carrying for somewhere else. And number two is for most people, they go back to really little.
Mm-hmm.
And many of those interactions are with their parents because their parents are who they're with, but it's not necessarily, now there are some parents that are mean and are very specific and say very demeaning things, but many times it's situations just like you described.
Yeah.
And this is the key, how powerful it is until we speak against that voice.
Mm-hmm.
Until not just I hear a lesson about it, that man, you're smart in God, but when I actually take my thought captive and say, wait a minute, God never says my smartness is what keeps me here. He said he'll provide this.
Right.
Right. And I think that is just that's been eye-opening and life-changing to me.
Yeah. That I've heard it described as an echo, what you're talking about, that you have all this energy with your spouse or your boss or your friend, anger. It could be anger, it could be great sadness, or it could be a lot of fear. And then when you realize, oh, this is really an echo from 4 years old. So the energy, whatever it is, has more to do with what I've been carrying for 43 years than it does with my conversation that I'm having with you right now. And it really does, it gives you a space to alleviate that and say, okay, so what can I replace that with? Mm-hmm. Again, I'm sure I went over 15 minutes yesterday trying to keep it in that zone, but I wanted to tell about Dad when he was a kid, and his dad would say to him point blank, did you say hi to the dummy in the mirror today? And he would say it in a wait for a response sort of way. I mean, he was just cruel. He would say it, and he would wait for him to say, no, I didn't. And so the message, I mean, it wasn't like a subtle Satan can use this for a seed. Some people actually have coaches, parents, siblings that are point blank giving messages of pain and hurt. There are all sorts of ways that these voices get into our head. Yesterday, I did want to illustrate that they can be subtle. They don't have to be somebody set out to hurt you. It's just how Satan can use those things. But there are very there. It's also possible for it to be a specific. Yeah, they meant to hurt. They meant to break something down in you, and Satan was super happy for that moment.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I've heard stories of famous people like the comedian Jerry Lewis. He gave an interview, and one of the defining moments in his life was really early on in elementary school, where he didn't pass. He wasn't. He was going to have to repeat second grade or whatever grade it was. And the way they did it then is you would come back on the first day of school. You'd go back to your old classroom, and then at some point everybody would get up and then walk to the new classroom. And he was the only one that stayed behind. And when you look at his work, basically what I remember him saying was pretty much everything I've done since then was to make that not true. That I am acceptable, and that I am wanted, and that I am. He didn't use those words. And the real difference between his story and our stories, or at least the option for us, is we believe God is involved in that, you know, just intricately from start to finish. We believe His Spirit is working on that. We're fulfilling, when we're doing the work you're talking about, we're fulfilling 2 Corinthians 10:5, where we take captive every thought and make it obedient to Christ. We're saying that voice is not correct. My intelligence, number one, isn't the measure of who I am or what I'll accomplish. And number two, that doesn't leave me powerless.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
That's good. No, that's good.
So I wanted to talk to you. This is something that just the picture of it, it became kind of a parable in my mind. You're sitting on that porch. You're, you know, incredibly upset. And then when your mom says, "Why didn't you go to Dad's office?" all of a sudden, it's almost like a scales are on your eyelids, and, you know, you move them away, and you could see your dad's office. So if you can see it, then you can walk to it. It's closed. That just was you could have stopped the lesson there and just said, "Tell us where this shows up in your life." You know, but what do you think about that picture of the Father is right there, but I'm stuck? You know, how does that speak to you?
Man, it feels like, again, a constant, and you don't see it till you see it. And then once you see it, you can't unsee it. You can't imagine, how did I not know that was there? It's been true all this time. And for whatever reason, I didn't want to. I didn't feel safe knowing, but I wasn't looking that way. And it could be I wasn't willing, or it could be I was just so self-absorbed that I could only look at me and my situation. So it feels like there are all these distractions that Satan can put around us. But I feel like it was true for me with parenting. I would get after my kids, and Kim would come to me and be really upset with what I had done. And I'm thinking, man, I handled that so well. Oh, I just rocked that bit of parenting. And she would be so upset. And I'm thinking, nobody got hit. Everybody was safe. Why are you so upset? And then when I realized, oh my goodness, I have been so overbearing in my bearing, violent in my demeanor, and in my voice, and in my shaking red face. Once I could see it, it felt like, man, why could I not see that before? Why did I not know that was going on? And it didn't make a magic cure that now I am able to avoid it, but it did make magic in that I see it coming, and I know what it feels like in my body, and I know what it feels like in my head. And so then I can make wise choices, of not handling this right now. Do I need to go into another room and cool down? Yeah, but until I could see it, couldn't see it. And honestly, there was nothing Kim could do to make me see it.
Yeah, that as a marital help, if we had some kind of special lens that we could let people, some glasses, we could let people just catch a glimpse of what they don't see.
Yeah,
And I certainly see that in my life is there are so many things that I didn't really notice while they're happening, but I was experiencing the ill effects of. And then all of a sudden I could, and I was like, oh yeah.
yeah,
The challenge with that is there's the awareness then of, okay, that must mean there are things I can't see right now that are, these voices are affecting the way I'm doing things, the way I'm reacting to things. And so it's still out in front of me, which that's why we have to stay humble. That's why we have to be teachable in basically any way God chooses to communicate. And I will remind us, if God's going to communicate with the donkey, he can certainly communicate through TV shows or through strangers or through anything. He's got that ability. So our job is to be watchful. Our job is to be teachable in that, and I think that's just really, really good. And that picture of, I even like the way you framed it there. That picture of while you're sitting there in your overwhelmed state, you literally can't see it. You can't see his office. And then once you receive a word of hope, and there's some correction there, but it's not a rebuke. You're like, oh, wait a minute, and
yeah,
I think that's how we are to each other often. Is you'll mention something about God that I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. Even if I knew it before, I somehow blocked it out.
yeah, yeah. It makes me think about working with AIM students, and they would go to the mission field and come back and say, man, nobody ever told me. And I would think, I remember exactly what was said. You were told. But before you go to the field, before you experience culture shock, it doesn't make sense.
Right.
So you can't hold, and you're getting so much information.
Right.
Um, but so then it does feel like a mystery. And again, so this takes me back to that same place. How in the world can I be smart enough to communicate well?
Mm.
Um, I am not smart enough to do that. How is that supposed to work, that we help people hear things when they aren't able to hear them? And I feel like the same answer is there. God says, I'm with you and I'm with them.
Mm.
Um, so it so as a minister, it doesn't alleviate the job for me, but it at the same time it does alleviate the responsibility that I I have to say it correctly. I have to know how to say it to this person, um, or I can just do the best I can and trust
Right.
God is with that person too, and he'll work at just the right time in their life to help them hear. And it may be because of nothing I've ever done. It may be because, and I don't know if you've had this experience when somebody tells you something you've been telling them, and you get offended because they finally heard it from somebody else, and you're like, oh, come on.
Right. Yes. I know a lot of husbands who their couple, they go to couples counseling and they come back and their wife is like, man, that counselor's so brilliant. And the guy if he's doing the right thing, he won't tell her, but he'll tell me. He's like, I had told her that like 20,000 times. And I think that's kind of the nature of me, uh, in the sense that I have to hear it a bunch, and I have to be, the fact that I'm teachable doesn't mean I'll learn it the first time. The fact that I'm teachable means I'll stay in the game until I can
Yeah,
learn it,
yeah,
and he's a patient teacher, God is. And so we have to remember he's not throwing up his hands with us. He said, okay, let's try it again.
yeah.
And so I think that's really a good signal.
So let's go to 2 Corinthians 10, um, that we're to take these thoughts captive, because I feel like that's a a constant through our sermons.
Mhm.
And it will show up again in our sermon this Sunday. Um, but talk about that some, about how what that means in this context, that we have these voices to choose from and that we take these thoughts captive.
Yeah. So to me, um, what that's saying is this. I don't know. I've heard statistics that you have like, I don't know, some several thousand messages a day come into your brain. So you're not going to be able to take every thought captive. It just goes too fast. My experience is that most people have two or three driving thoughts and maybe even one primary driving thought about themselves and their identity, you know. And you could believe a lot of other things, even contradictory things, but this one driving thought tends to affect dramatically how you look at everything. And so any of those thoughts theoretically you could take captive, but usually you don't have the energy for them unless something's bugging you. So
Mhm.
you and I have a conversation and you say something and you're not mean. It bugs me. It bugs me you said that, you know? So I walk away from it and just, this is me being honest when things bug me, I'll vacillate between, oh, I'm so dumb or they're so dumb. You know what I mean? I mean, I'm easy to get along with, they're hard. Well, maybe I'm being hard and they're, I don't know, you know,
Yeah.
and the human mind just keeps processing it until we lose energy for it or until we can gossip to somebody about it, you know what I mean, kind of thing. I think this passage would say, wait a minute, stop, and with God, not on your own, because he, in that context, 2 Corinthians, he's talking about divine weapons, you know, so you can't use divine weapons without God. And so you're like, okay, God, help me sort through this. Why am I so frustrated? What am I telling myself? And if you do that several times, you may get it on the first time. But if you develop a practice of why am I so angry, or why am I so sad, or why am I so this or that, sometimes it may be, you know, you're angry because somebody stole your car and killed your dog. You know what I mean? But a lot of times you're like, I don't even know why. And then you start looking at what you're telling yourself, you know, and like I said, it may take a few times, and depending on your personality, it's easier to access than others. Um, but then you start to come to, oh, what I'm telling myself is, um, I'm dumb, or I'm stupid, or a smart person would have done better, this kind of thing. I will actually hear come out of my mouth me calling myself, like talking out loud, calling myself moron or idiot, you know. And so that's good for me to recognize what's coming out of my mouth started in my mind. And I'm like, okay, wait a minute. I mean, yeah, I don't have any problem with somebody saying, oh, you're dumb or an idiot, generally speaking, you know, because I could recognize that a lot. But I'm like, but that's not reality, because God says that I have what I need in him. God says that I'm smart enough to do whatever I need to as long as I'm with him, you know, kind of thing. And so what we're doing is we're taking that thought that we crystallize in the exercise, that I'm too stupid to do this or to handle this. And what we've done is we said we're taking it captive. We're saying, God, what's the truth here? Oh, the truth is I have everything I need in you. This is not my identity. Jason is a stupid person. My identity is Jason is a saved
Mm-hmm.
person, a person that God is with. And I think that's true of, it shows up in relationships a lot when you have one common fight that you keep having. Most couples say, no matter what we're talking about, we basically have the same fight over and over again. Dig into that. What is it that you're thinking? You know, last week or 2 weeks ago, we were talking about I'm not enough. And it hit me in mid conversation. That's what I was saying with one of my friends, Doug, you know, and it was such a revelatory thing. And it's not that I've never thought it before, but for some reason, bam, it hit me. I saw it, just like you saw your dad's office. And then I went and I called him and I said, hey, I realize this about me. I am always telling myself I'm not enough when I'm talking to you. And that makes me react more harshly. I don't listen as well, you
Yeah.
know. But this is the work. When we talk about soul work, this is the work. Now I want to be clear. It's not me manhandling the work. It's saying, God, I see this in me. Will you help me correct it? And he
Yeah.
gives me the truth.
Yeah. That these divine, um, how does it say it?
I think weapons. Yeah.
Weapons.
Yeah.
They help us demolish strongholds and arguments. And for me, that's taken it out of these debates, these theological debates, or these doctrinal theories, and those were what we were, the arguments we were supposed to demolish.
Mhm.
And it's moved it into real life, that we recognize, oh, that's the voice I'm hearing. That's what Satan wants to argue, is that I am not enough, that I'm not worthy. And you're right. It feels like for the most part, it narrows down to a couple of distinct messages that he may toy with and say different ways. Um, but if we take these thoughts captive, we can do something with them. Like, just,
Yeah.
we can look at them and notice, because some of the times we call the voice God's, and we think it's God telling us, you better get this right. You better be a good boy. You got to do things better than this. And God wants to come alongside of us to help us see that's not God's voice.
Yeah.
The voice of condemnation is not his. The voice of grace and truth, that's his.
That is so right and so good. I think, I was thinking right now, what's the message when the devil says to Jesus, "Hey, if you are the Messiah, turn these stones to bread." There's an
Mm,
accusation there. Number one, first and foremost, you're not the Messiah. Or in order to be the Messiah, you have to prove yourself. God's saying, because he's just come from his baptism, right? And he's just, this is my son, right? And now here's the devil saying, you're not his son unless you can turn the bread, unless you have better performance.
yeah.
You're not his son until all these people witness the angels healing you. You're not going to be the savior until everybody bows to you by my power. And those are all things that Jesus knew as his fundamental identity. And I'm telling you, the devil's technique doesn't change that much.
Yeah.
He's still saying the same things to me. The difference is Jesus believed God and I don't. And I have to make a choice to believe.
Yeah. Yeah. And Jesus's response was, uh, every word that comes out of his mouth, that's my nourishment. And the
Mhm.
last words were, "You're my beloved son." I mean,
That's right.
that was the last thing he heard God say.
Mhm.
And that's his nourishment.
Yeah.
What God says is true about him. Um,
Yeah.
I think, is it Philip Yancey that makes the point, Satan was giving Jesus a lot of opportunities to prove and to provide proof, and Jesus discarded all of those ways Satan handed him, and the church has tried all the more harder to grasp those ways Satan wants. Um, yeah, we've turned it around backwards, trying to prove who we are, trying to look attractive. Um, and how much different would that be if we would just accept we are his beloved children? And
Yeah.
might that make a difference?
Yeah. And we would frame that as honorable. Well, of course we're going to turn stone to bread. We have to show everybody we're the son of God here.
Yeah, yeah,
And that's, it's funny because the majority of times I've heard the temptation of Christ taught, it's been from the vantage point of, look how sharp Jesus was in his words, you know, and Jesus was sharp in his words, but it misses, I think, largely the point that this was not a test of whether he turned stones to bread or throw himself down from place. This was a test of whether he believed what God told him.
mm-hmm.
At the root of it all, it's a test. And that's what I feel like every test, every temptation I experience is, will I believe what God told me, or will I find my own way, which is
Yeah,
often the devil's supplied way. And I think that's the battle right there. That's where the taking captive dynamic, that's the root of it. Now, once you have some experience with that, you're going to see it'll show up in other people's lives, and God will give you opportunity. Because I know we've both had those opportunities, but I do think you're really limited if you haven't experienced that yourself to
yeah,
help other people, because
yeah,
it's just a different feeling to do it that way.
yeah. And that the truth will set you free. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you get to experience watching that come over people's countenance. You can see it in their face. They're recognizing, oh, this has been a lie Satan has been telling me uh, for decades. And when they rest in but what do I know is true? Um, it's amazing to watch the healing
Yes,
happen in that moment.
it is. It is. Hey, I want to wrap up with the answer, and I'll just let you answer the question. But so I'm not smart enough. Is kind of how you articulated the voice that can be in our head, and the answer you gave. I want you to share that and why. Why does that answer the question? So, what does God's voice say?
Yeah. So we walked through half a dozen scriptures of God saying, "I am with you." That was the message of Jesus, Emmanuel. I am with you. And so I would, at first blush, I would rather God have said, "Oh, Tim, you are the smartest one in the room. You really are brilliant. Everybody really ought to listen to you. Don't be afraid of making mistakes because, my goodness, you are so bright." And that's not even a part of God's response. His response is, "I'm here. I am right here with you." And it does provide the peace, because if I'm with the smartest guy in the room, if I'm with the baddest guy in the room, and I mean bad as in powerful, man, I've got a lot of confidence, and I um, there's a place where I experience this, where I'm with such strong, capable men that my leadership looks the best, because I know I'm not going to mess this up. I can push and I can stretch myself because there are stronger, wiser men in the room, and if I mess up, they've got this. They can, they're smart enough to help in a way that I wasn't seeing. And when I can imagine that that's true about God, um, I'm not going to mess this up. I'm not going to um, push this beyond all repair because God's bigger than this. And God, um, and I'm not trying to give myself a pass and to say, so just go willy nilly, whatever I want to do. But I'm walking beside God, and it's like, it's not like a 47-year-old with his dad. It's like a 4-year-old and his dad. That he's got his hand on my shoulder and he's saying, let's play at this together. Let's dig in and let's see what's the magical thing that's going to happen here. So I don't have all the answers. I don't see everything, but I'm sitting there with the God who does. And it frees me up to not just sit in the room, but to imagine and to dream and to recognize the joy of the situation, even if the situation is hard, difficult, or sad. That being with God in that moment is a lot bigger than me.
I love that. I just think that this dynamic of I just always say this: God is not interested in us mastering the material. He didn't give us the Bible as an instruction book where you're like, okay, I learned the 5,007 steps of being a good Christian, and now I'm working on step 2572. There's one step, and then there's things that come from that step. But the first step is trusting Him, is believing Him.
Yeah.
It's as a function of our love for Him, and then trusting Him to work through us. And it's not like that's in one obscure passage. It shows up again and again in the New Testament. He works in you. I'm working through you. And that's the thing, is He's the one setting the assignment. He's the one detailing what it takes to make the assignment work. And then He's the one that makes the assignment work. I mean, He's got all the bases covered. Our job is participation, which our ongoing participation totally is defined by, am I trusting Him in this moment? Do I really believe what He tells me?
Yeah. Yeah. He yeah, he is saying, I want to be with you.
Mm-hmm.
And are we good with that?
Yeah. Yeah. So then that rate, well, why would we not? Why would we not be good with that?
Yeah.
And certainly one thing I think of is I don't like thinking myself as a 4-year-old capacity. You know, if somebody says you have a 4-year-old's intelligence or a 4-year-old's competency or whatever, I'd be very resistant to that. And yet you don't age out with God. You're still his child at 4 to whatever. But yeah, pride, I guess, is what jumps in my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think of people that would be our um, heroes in the faith, like the ones that we know and we see their ministries. And generally it means we see their pain and their suffering.
Mm.
And we think, what if I have to go through that? What if I have to make those sacrifices? And so we start putting, if I knew when I was 17 leaving home that I would one day spend 11 and a half years in Mexico, and the last year and a half of that ministry, having a direct ministry in the slums of Mexico City, I would have said, no, I don't think so. Because I didn't want to be a missionary. I would have opted out. But God didn't ask me to do that at 17. But when we think of other people, we see what the end result is, and we're not ready for that. And so oh God, I think I know better how my life ought to play out. And we're not willing to go through that first window of faith out of fear of what the next window of faith might be.
Right. That is really, really excellent, is that when he calls us to something, and you see this to the people in the Bible, even though his calls are sometimes very abrupt compared to where they thought their life was heading, but you see him saying, I will meet you where you are, and you don't have to figure out how to get to the next step.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it just happens over and over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I love that. I love this theme of voices. I love that counter. To me, it's very empowering when you talk about it, like immediately when you were saying, I'm not smart enough, I'm like, oh, I take on that message sometimes, and then sometimes I try to answer that message by saying, but I'm smarter than all the people in this room.
Yeah.
And that's maybe more wrong. You know what I mean? It's that neither of those are resting in God. They're all depending on myself, which will fail eventually. But I love this theme because it empowers me to have an answer to that temptation. God is with me on this.
Yeah.
Me being smart enough isn't even one of the prerequisites.
Yeah.
God is with me.
Yeah. That I think I went over this briefly, but that idea that whatever the message is, it's calling for an action. And for me, it's so shut up. Don't lead. But I do think for others, the action is lead stronger. Like to the other end, it's no longer a healthy leadership. It's don't anybody argue with me because that message is yelling at me. I'm not smart enough. And for anybody to argue with me, that just compounds it. So it is this weird, Satan's no dummy. He wants to control us, and he wants to control what happens in the church. And he's whispering things in our ear to guide that.
Absolutely. And I think to myself, if Satan got to Jesus, he is getting to you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Just because you don't see him, it doesn't mean he's not getting to you. And really recognizing his main mode of attack is accusation and deception and just misleading you into thinking, well, maybe God doesn't know exactly what he's talking about here.
Yeah.
It's a very powerful, repetitive methodology that he uses against all of us.
And there is something You mentioned soul work in this. This is a piece of doing our own soul work. There is something beautiful in being able to witness other people experiencing the same thing, that it helps us imagine I'm not alone in this. The other people are battling their messages, and it may not be mine. But if I can imagine Satan is lying to them too, then it does change how I can interact with them, because I don't know what Satan is saying to them, but I'm certain he's whispering, and so I don't have to get my way. I don't have to make sure they know I'm the smartest in the room. I can be patient and imagine, okay, what is really going on here? Yeah, it opens up possibilities for ministering in areas that I hadn't imagined previously.
That's really good. Well, thank you for the sermon and this conversation.
Yeah, man, I am really excited about our next sermon.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be
I think we can tell our audience, because we're dealing with only the most faithful at this point.
Right. Yeah, so we are going to co-preach, and it'll be a pre-recorded conversation. Yeah, so I'm really excited about how that's looking right now.
Yeah, I'm excited too. All right, man.
Because every week we've had to preach some way different. So hey, why not?
Why not this way?
Yep.
Someday we'll preach from this beach, wherever this beach is. Yeah.
That looks nice.
I just think we should, just because,
Yep.
So, all right, man. Talk to you later. Love you, Tim.
Love you, man. Bye.